for the homestead property, I was curious, just wanted to have an understanding of where you were coming from with that decision. So I have a couple handouts that I had prepared, and I wanted to just start with the one that starts here with the New Hampshire Non-Point Source Management Program Plan. That's something that the state has. This one is dated 2024, I mean 2020 to 24. And just a few comments that I pulled from that plan, just about non-point source pollution is responsible for about 90% of the pollution in our surface water in the state. So it's a significant issue. We also have warmer temperatures, which we all know that are occurring, especially in winter and early spring. So we're getting higher, faster snow melt. We're getting greater volumes of runoff and peak flows compared to what we've had in the past. Southern New Hampshire extreme precipitation events are expected to double by 2050. So these storm events that are really causing flooding, we're expecting to get more of them. Things that we didn't used to see, we're going to be seeing more of it. And we can, more likely we will have storm events of 4 inches or more in a 48-hour period. 50% of road salt, or greater than 50% of road salt, is attributed to private roads and parking lots. So it's not just highways, but 50% is private. There's also the growing concern for PFAS, which I'm sure you're familiar with, that term, found in stormwater runoff. Trees and shrubs are considered the optimum vegetation types to promote filtration of pollutants. And protecting surface water quality can be done by controlling soil erosion, managing, treating, and recharging stormwater runoff from development sites. Then NOAA has a few comments also about the impact of stormwater and impervious surface. So if you have impervious surface, reduces the amount of infiltration of stormwater, which would treat any kind of pollutants. So if you have impervious surface, you also have a greater amount of runoff going into the streams before it gets treated. So you have more sediment, more pollution, which all can degrade water quality. Sensitive streams can be impacted by as little as 5 to 10% of impervious surface on a lot. So, but once you go up to greater than 20 to 25%, you have a greater impairment. Riparian buffers can be an important component for stream stability, pollutant removal, and stream health maintenance. So those are just some general considerations about stormwater runoff and the effect of impervious surface. So what I have below here is just some real data from our river that was collected over last year, and it has to do with specific conductance. And that chart, specific conductance, measures the amount of ions that are circulating in water. So
the amount of what?
Ions. Okay, so if you have something, you dump something in the water, it ionizes, and that's how you measure whether it's clean or not. Distilled water, deionized water is clean water, you take all that out. So if you kind of look, this shows each month. And what's important is if you can look under May and you see Stone Arch Bridge Keene, and you see that the column goes up to just a little bit above 50, and the measurement is microsiemens. Then you go up to that next line in between the Stone Arch Bridge and the Keene Wastewater Treatment Plant, and it goes up to 100. That site is Route 101, Martel Court. So it's basically, we're taking a measurement of the ions above Keene and below Keene. And what this tells you is it goes from like 50 to 100. And 100 to 200 is considered moderate to high impact. And what that is giving us is an idea of what happens when you have more development and more impervious surface, more runoff. You end up with more in the water. So here we measure at the Thompson Covered Bridge, and then we don't measure again until Winchester. But this will show you a developed area and the impact. If you go into June, you see the same thing. Route 101 Keene, it's above that 100 line. The line before it is just a little bit above 52. So once again, before Keene and after Keene, you have a significant increase in the amount of conductance attributed to development and runoff. So taking a look at the mill, I have these, I mean, I'm sure you're familiar with the site. This is kind of dark, but you can see here is Main Street, Covered Bridge, and then here is Swanzey Street, and then down here is Winchester Street. But this is the mill property here. And there's all buildings and pavement, and then there's this tiny strip right here that's undeveloped. And then right along here you have a row of trees. I'm not exactly sure if that's on their land or if that's the abutters' land. So this is a copy of a plan that was drawn up in December of 2020 that kind of shows some of the where the river is and the different areas for shoreline protection. Shoreline protection is divided into a 50-foot buffer where no development can happen, and then 150, which is a woodland buffer where you have the Shoreline Protection Act specifies the percent of impervious surface, and then you have the 250, which is the full impact for shoreline. So if you can see here, this dark line is the river, and that's what they call as the ordinary high water mark, where you start to measure. This line right here is the 50-foot buffer. So you can see that all of this is pavement, building. There's most of this 50-foot buffer is currently untouched and intact, but everything else beyond that is developed with impervious surface. The 250-foot buffer, so the extent of the shoreline protection is here. So this amount of the property is within shoreline protection. This amount is not. So this whole area, the newer part where the field house is, and the little building where they used to sell the wool, and there's offices there now, that's not within the shoreline protection. But this is just this area here. So the second page gives you some of the provisions of Shoreline Protection Act. And if you look under trees, vegetation removal, and then you see that waterfront buffer area, within 50 feet of the reference line, except for a 6-foot path to the water, which people can put in, shrubs may be trimmed and pruned to a minimum height of 3 feet. And then basically it needs to be intact, except that if you maintain a certain percentage of trees and shrubs, there's a grid system that you must maintain, and you can't remove beyond that amount. So that's the area that we're talking about right now that is currently undeveloped. There's a whole lot of area here that's impervious surface. A lot of it isn't even in the shoreline protection. So I'm not clear on exactly why you would want to develop this 50-foot buffer, since it's got trees and shrubs which are known to inhibit pollution, to help with infiltration. It's also provides some cooling for the water. It also provides habitat for small mammals. You know, I moved here in 1981, and I started working with the river in around 1990. Actually, before that, but 1990 is where I became much more involved. So when I was doing gathering information in order to place the river into the Rivers Management Protection Program, I heard stories about the river turning colors based on whatever color the dye was being used at the mill. And I don't think any of us here had ever seen that, you know, because by 1970s, you had the Clean Water Act. And so things started getting cleaned up. So we no longer had that pollution occurring. We started getting our wastewater treatment plants, which we have, which helped to remove waste that was actually, there was actual septage going right into the river prior to that. So the river's come a long way. And on this particular parcel, we have a 50-foot buffer that's intact. We have 90% of that rest of the lot that is impervious surface. So why would we want to impact a river that has come along and improved over the years? Why would we want to take away from a buffer that's actually providing some protection? On the back of this sheet, the first sheet I gave you, is the RSA, and it talks about non-conforming structures. So that's what this is. This is an existing non-conforming structure. And there are provisions in the RSA for that. They may be repaired, replaced in kind, reconstructed in place, altered, or expanded. However, no expansion or relocation of the existing footprint within the waterfront buffer. So that's the only restriction in terms of any kind of changes that you want to make on that property. You just can't move anything closer to the high water mark. And also, it says any enclosure, there's no, doesn't allow for enclosure or conversion of living space of any deck or open porch, which there's, the only open area would be right next to the Thompson Covered Bridge. There's that little driveway, and then that little, I don't know if it's a, yeah, loading dock of sort, you know. But so that wouldn't be permissible to be closed in, you know, for housing purposes. However, when Sarah and I met with the owner, and Sherry Domino from Concom met with the owner, he had expressed, I asked him, you know, what's inhibiting you from, you know, doing what you want to do? And his comment was, well, you know, if you put a restaurant in, people might want to have a dock or, you know, be able to see the water. Well, this says, if you look at the provision number 5, Roman numeral 5, a deck or open porch extending a maximum of 12 feet towards the reference line may be added to non-conforming structures. So he could have an extension into that 50-foot buffer, and that's provided for a deck or, you know, an open porch, if that was his concern. But in terms of the rest of the lot, there, I don't see how this could impact his being responsibly renovating that property for housing or for commercial use. So I'm kind of curious as your understanding of why you would want to go ahead and go through with trying to obtain an urban exemption on this property.
Basically, as you mentioned, Mr. Chinford feels that's an important component of developing that site, and that's obviously an important significant structure in this area. The board wants to be receptive to supporting the redevelopment of that property and trying to get it to its highest and best use. So even though it is still somewhat, I'll say, unclear exactly what they're planning, I think where it's just this, it's only one section of the river. We looked at adding, we discussed adding a couple different additional properties with the park property and decided to just focus on this one. So felt that the potential impact, again, maybe whatever they do doesn't even end up kind of encroaching into that area, but it's a way for the town to show support for that property and to try to do, we have a few tools that we can use to try to spur development. And so I think the board felt it was important to try to be collaborative and try to work with that owner to try to get that property to its best use.
So yes, getting that property to its best use, and that best use does include protecting the river that it abuts, doesn't it? I mean, why would you want, I mean, we have, the downside is we have no provisions in our regulations, our Swanzey regulations, to prevent that buffer from being developed. This is our only, Swanzey defers to shoreline protection. And so if you take that away, then he can go ahead and do whatever he wants in that buffer zone, which is a significant protection for the river, for the water quality of that river. And that would just be going backwards. I mean, so you've got river upstream, river downstream, and then you got a place where you have potential runoff from salt, you have other pollutants that come from the pavement, from cars, from just general uses, PFAs. And there's that little buffer that's intact. And so he can still put in his deck. There's nothing in here that says he can't develop. He's got 90% of that property already, it developed within a footprint, and you can still go ahead and change that. You can still do the expansions, you can still do the renovations within the parameters of the Shoreline Protection Bill. So it's not really inhibiting him from doing whatever he wants, but what you're basically saying is you would just as soon give somebody free rein to do whatever they choose, but the rest of the town, you still expect them to abide by our rules and regulations to protect water quality, drinking water, or whatever aspects of the town that you want to protect, livability of the town. I mean, why would you single out for one person to throw away the one provision that protects the river that he sees as an attribute that he says people would want, access to? And he can't have access. It's given in here. He can't have access. He can't have a deck. He can't, he can do the renovations he needs within that footprint, which is already, I mean, there's not much left. It's already developed. And so it's basically a strong protection and our only protection. So I would ask the board to reconsider, and perhaps I hear what you have to say, but I don't hear what you have to say, unless.
I agree with Michael. The mill has been just an impending Damocles sword, for lack of a better analogy, that without someone who is capable of renovating the mill, there was a very real possibility that we would, as a town, end up being responsible for it, which would cost, just to do what the charrette recommended, which was opening up the pathway, that was over $1 million
Right.
just to do that. And so it would be at least that amount to tear that mill down. So my feeling was, as Michael said, that we should provide a true developer, which Chinburg is a true
Right.
developer.
Yes,
I
yes.
had the opportunity years ago not knowing I was in one of their renovations, to be in one of their renovations, which they did right on the bank. Actually, they had parking. Yeah, they had parking behind the building that went right up to the river's edge. And this particular building had a beautiful view over that parking lot to the river. So, as I said, I didn't know it was a Chinburg property at the time, but they did do a nice job. So I was thrilled when we learned that they had purchased the mill, because they are the first ones that have owned it in my time here that legitimately have the ability to pull off a renovation that would be beneficial not only to us as a town, but to the broader community. So that was my rationale for supporting the urban exemption. And I know it opens up a potential can of worms, because we don't know what it is that they want to do. Assuming and maybe Michael, correct me if I'm wrong, it's still whatever their plans are, they still need to go through site plan review. And even if they have that exemption, it doesn't mean that the planning board is going to have to agree with it. But the flip side is that we've shown them that as a board, that we support their efforts to renovate the mill. And that's my position. I don't anticipate that they're going to do anything that's going to intentionally compromise the water quality. It's just not their nature. If they were doing that, they wouldn't be welcomed as they are in communities around the state to renovate these mills that otherwise are in disrepair. So anyway, that's my position, and I'm going to stay with it, and I would follow it through the planning board process. I could be outvoted by my colleagues, but
the planning board has no ability to have control over that 50-foot buffer. They have no ability to say you cannot build in that, because we don't have any provision that says that.
Well, there's already runoff.
There's runoff, but there's a 50-foot buffer that
There are
treats
ways,
that
right,
runoff.
but there are ways through engineering
Yes, there are.
to
Yes,
take
there
that
are.
runoff and redirect it, maybe
Yes.
to the south, to the other wooded area that you spoke of, whether or not it's the abutter's property or that property.
Yes, there is, but there's nothing to,
Planning board could require it.
but they can't prevent him from putting something in that 50-foot buffer, which is a natural.
Which is what he's asking for, is to be able to do that.
Right.
And then redirect it maybe somewhere else. Maybe engineer something that would be better in the long run than what it is now.
But not if right now, that 50-foot buffer is intact. And
Is it working as good as what he might engineer? Maybe he's
Yes,
going to
it
make
is.
something better.
Well, I mean,
We don't know.
information and, research indicates that distance in ground and shrubs and trees act to help infiltration and to filter. So to have the water go in and also be treated before it hits the river. So anything else you do, I mean, right now, you need to do something to take what's already running off and maybe redirect it elsewhere to lessen that impact.
I don't know if you can't work in that area. Can you? You have to leave it alone.
You have to, right, you leave it alone, but I'm talking about all the impervious surface, the parking lots, the buildings. There's infiltration trenches you can place around the building to take some of that runoff in place rather than it running directly into the river. You've got slopes of roofs that make a difference, but
I know there's a driveway that comes on the back of the parking lot. And
both
comes right
sides,
down,
actually.
right.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
maybe that would be better in the long run. And then as far as the conductance, last year we had the drought
Mhm.
in the beginning, obviously. I don't know how far back these charts go, but looks like early in the year, there wasn't much runoff. So that there wasn't much conductance. You have February, May, June, and then it peaks. July and August, September was when the drought ended.
Right, it's less water flow.
We got a lot more
actually,
water runoff.
September was when we had a little bit more water, and so what happened is you see the numbers go down in September, and that's because you have dilution.
Well, there's dilution, but before that, when we have the heavy rains, it's washing the roads and everything else. There's runoff.
Right, that increases
So that
runoff.
increases, and then you have dilution because the water level comes up, and there's dilution. The other thing is Keene wastewater treatment plant's kind of right in there, and then you see it peak after that. They have a copper problem that they know of, that they're trying to do something with. And I can't believe that copper is an excellent conductor in the water.
So
and maybe that's an issue.
That wastewater treatment plant is in the middle, but that particular site is upstream of the wastewater treatment plant. Okay. So again, if you just want to take May as an example, you're going from 50 pre-Keene up to 100. And it then after that is the site upstream of the wastewater treatment plant. The next two sites that are lower are actually the South Branch. All right.
Okay.
So you've got the flow of the South Branch, and then you have the crescent covered bridge. So that's why it drops that little bit, because you're taking the South Branch, which doesn't have any of the river, but then you're adding that to the river, but you still end up with, at the crescent, you know, that elevated reading, and it kind of continues as you go downstream. But the purpose of this is to show that regardless of what's happening in terms of the amount of runoff, pre and post Keene, pre and post development, you have a lower value before you get into a developed area. The value goes up after. So there's more runoff and there's more stuff coming into the river.
And I think everybody recognizes that. So,
so
the other option is to not develop anything.
No, the other option is to shoreline protection. Actually, if you have over 30% of impervious surface, you need to employ engineering methods to handle the treatment.
I guess my point is from here all the way up to Keene, to the wastewater treatment plant, is basically undeveloped, except for the Crescent Bridge. There's the ultimate shoreline protection.
Right.
Hundreds of yards wide.
Right.
All the way up. And yet it's high.
Well, it's maintaining, if you see, it's kind of maintaining. It doesn't, but the significant increase is right after the development, and then it maintains.
Right, which we understand.
Yeah.
So I think we can engineer something better. I'm not going to speak for the developer, but I think right now there is runoff, and that if he can get in there and do something with those two roads that come down to the river, that maybe something could be better.
But if you give him, there is no weight.
Right, but he can't do anything right now. He can't work in there.
Yes, he can. He can. That's what I'm trying to say.
He can put it back, but what I'm saying is he cannot go in and actually do anything engineering-wise in that area.
Not in the 50-foot buffer, because you can't improve on a natural buffer. That's the premise.
I respectfully disagree, because I think the engineers can. The wastewater treatment plant is engineered to do better than all the septic systems dumping in.
Yeah, because septic systems fail.
Right.
That's why.
Yeah. Then plants fail if you don't engineer them.
Septic systems are engineered.
Yeah.
It's still an engineering solution. Right. So it's not necessarily, it's a failure of an engineering solution. But the point being is that the Shoreline Protection Act does not inhibit him from renovating that property. It just keeps him from developing a 50-foot buffer that's protecting the river. It does not prevent him from doing whatever else he wants to do up there, because it's basically,
a non-conforming structure. So he can still do whatever within that area. It's just protecting that 50 feet. And why wouldn't you want to protect that resource? He can still develop the land. And you think he can't properly?
I don't think he can.
You don't think he can?
No, I think you just pointed out that he can put a deck on it,
Right.
but he can't really do anything else.
But,
He can cut a shrub down to 3 feet or something, right? But
right.
what else can he do?
But we're talking about the 90% of that parcel that he owns that can still be redeveloped and changed into whatever he wants. And we're just asking to leave that buffer intact, because that's the critical piece in terms of river protection, surface water protection. And right now, this bill, this act, that RSA allows him to still renovate the property, to put in there whatever he wants, but just leave that buffer. That's all it does, is ask him to leave that buffer, which is, again, a critical piece. And so we throw that out the window?
I just think he's trying to make it better. There's already runoff.
There's already runoff, and
the
he
storms are
can
gonna
make
get
it better.
worse, so there's gonna be more runoff.
He can make it better by staying within that, beyond that, between that 50 and 200 or beyond area to treat that stormwater.
Yeah.
But leave that 50-foot buffer, which is, literature will tell you, is critical for habitat and for water quality.
Michael, did he give an explanation of why, what it was needed for? Or was it a general?
The general request, he hasn't finalized his plans for the property, he talked about potentially doing patios or barbecue areas, recreation areas, that sort of thing. I don't think he's planning on constructing structures or parking or driveways. I think it's more kind of ancillary. That's what I understood from our session, a year ago, when we first talked about it.
Did he say anything about trying to close off the building so the river didn't literally run through it? Is that part of what he's trying to accomplish?
Honestly, we talked to him pretty early. He hadn't even done, I don't even know that he was aware of that at that point. He was going to do like a geometric review of the entire building, so I don't even know if he was aware of that. I don't remember that happening.
I'm just curious.
I know he talked about tearing down a wooden structure, and it's not clear to me which part of that. It's somewhere in the middle of the complex, I think.
It's that part that was recommended at the charrette to be torn down.
Yeah.
That alone, and the quotes that we had been told were about $1 million. That's the one I was referring to pull that down, seal off the ends, or whatever he's going to, I don't know what he's going to do, but the plan was to seal off the ends, pull out the middle, and create a vista walkway down to the water. That was from the charrette.
I thought
the
the walkway was going to be going through, like parallel with Swanzey Street kind of thing, like Winchester Street.
Yep, there was that,
Yeah.
but this was a way to come from the parking area that goes to the field house to walk down to the river.
And you could still do that. You could still do that. You can have a 6-foot path going within that 50-foot buffer down to the
It'd be more than
water.
6 feet.
It'd be more than 6. It's
No, 6 feet wide.
Right, that's what I'm
Yeah.
saying.
Yeah. And the other thing you have to remember is you know, that's also in floodplain. If,
yeah, that is. It's why it runs through the building.
excuse me?
That's why the river, when it overflows, runs through the building.
Through the building,
Right.
yeah, well, okay, so yeah, so you know, you have to be careful what you put in there, and we do have some floodplain regulations, but you have to go to the ZBA, which we know may or may not enforce the regulation, or may allow the exceptions, so,
Appreciate your passion.
pardon?
Appreciate your passion and your knowledge. I'd I'd like to know more about this chart, because it gets confusing going back and forth between the two covered bridges and the south branch.
I think we're a little late for
Oh, sorry.
All right. Pardon?
I said 10 minutes ago. Yeah.
Okay, well, just so you know, after the Crescent Bridge, the next site is the Thompson Covered Bridge. So on
What I
that
meant was
chart.
going back and forth through here. One month it's Thompson, then it goes Crescent, then Thompson. So
But the sites, all of the sites are on there. It's just that when you try to fit a chart onto this amount of space, it can't fit all the words in. So each one, if you,
sorry, Ken.
yep. Well, so,
I can catch up with you.
okay, but this is the sequence: Stone Arch, King, upstream of the King Lawson Crescent, and then right in between, you'll see there's a line, and that's where Thompson Covered Bridge is, and then
Okay.
Route 119 and Hinsdale, then it starts again in Washington, goes up to
Okay.
Richmond, so.
Thank you, Barbara.
Thank you.
Is that mine or yours? No, that's yours.
We're now 12 minutes into the public hearing, we're supposed to start at 6 o'clock. And the public hearing is in accordance with Article 14, passed the 2004 annual town meeting, and that's 14A. It has to do with the two lots,
Yes, sir.
2 lots owned by the town. One is map 16, lot 13, and the second is map 16, lot 19. And the public hearings